So, this subject is very frustrating. I feel like talking about it is making my brain go in circles and circles, or I'm trying to figure out what's on the other side of the universe. But I found that Skinner's main point is that he is trying to find a connection between the real environment and our behavior. He's assuming that there's a mental representation of either thing in between, and that there are steps to get from the environment to the mental representation to our behavior. He's recognizing mental representations as existing, and that it is a crucial step in between environment and behavior. However, he's discounting it as any sort of explanation for the behavior, which I think is kind of bizarre. Just because you can't actually see what's going on inside somebody's head, just because you can't read minds, doesn't mean that there isn't something very crucial happening that leads to a certain behavior, especially if that behavior seemingly does not have an environmental explanation. Skinner seems to be thinking of this as a very linear process, that humans are just kind of an input-output system, that the environment is being put in and you're putting out a behavior, and back and forth and back and forth. But really, this relationship isn't linear at all, but inner experience influences behavior, and vice versa. As a person learns and makes connections throughout their life, the relationship and the connections get stronger and stronger. You can't have one without the other. You can't have an inner experience without a behavior, or a behavior without an inner experience. What we don't know, well, what we can kind of figure out is like the chemical stuff that's going on in our brains that can link sensation to perception. That stuff's pretty complicated, so the question is, what's happening when, say, I'm looking at my camera, that makes me behave in a way that I am interacting with it, where my inner speech says it's black, it's a Nikon, there's a lens, I'm supposed to be looking right there. Other certain camera stuff. What's funny is that my inner speech doesn't actually say these things, it kind of just imagines it. But without this kind of representation of a camera, whatever that representation may be, whether it's in the form of words, inner any kind of experience, whatever it may be, how am I able to translate this thing in front of me, this camera, into a behavior? Well, that is an excellent question. Skinner can't answer it. I can't answer it, because we cannot describe inner speech ever. Because even if I try to explain my inner speech, it's not going to be accurate. It's kind of like taking a picture of a picture of a picture, which Skinner kind of grasped in his paper. He kind of grasped it in his paper of not being able to directly translate what's in your head into a behavior. So you can't quite grasp inner speech. You can't even grasp your own, because when you think about it, then you're thinking about, it's this whole thing. That's where the cognitive circles comes in. I'm talking about how you can't have, he talked about how you can't have inner experience without outer experience, and I relate this to inner speech and outer speech, and how Skinner should be talking about types of inner speech or types of mental representations instead of how, and kind of being upset that he can't read minds. So I kind of just want to bring up outer speech is a type of behavior. It's a verbal behavior. Skinner's question is, how does environment manifest as verbal behavior? My question is verbal behavior an accurate representation of inner speech? I think that is a more interesting question. Personally, I think that inner speech is much more complex than outer speech. Some feelings you can't put into words. Skinner even mentioned that. It's much like how behavior cannot be explained solely by environmental input alone, or even with a combination of environment and inner speech and verbal behavior all at the same time. So, for example, why am I craving a brownie right now? I don't know. I don't have any brownies. I haven't had a brownie in a long time. There's no environmental cues that can make me want to crave a brownie. But, and there's nothing in my head that's saying, I want a brownie, I want a brownie. So what, there's some kind of mental thing going on that connects, there's no environmental input, but something is making me want a brownie. I'm not even hungry. So, what kind of connection is that exactly? And that, I think, is a much more interesting question than what Skinner is bringing up. He is asking how. How does this happen? How does this happen? But I don't think we're ever going to know, because we cannot explain our inner experience. No one can explain ours. I can't explain my own. It's impossible. So what is more interesting to me is what type of inner speech is happening. So if my brain isn't saying, I want a brownie, I want a brownie, what kind of representation is going on in my head that is making me crave a brownie?